Hi crafty friends, Jen Cassell here. I'm really excited to share with you this project that I created for Scrapaholics Chipboard. I will leave all of her information in the description box. I really suggest you go over there and check out some of her amazing designs. She is cranking out the new pieces lately and I've been so impressed. But for this one, this is going to be the second in my holiday card series for 2022. I wanted to do a really simple card, and this is actually a card that I saw on Pinterest. It's my version of that card. I will link the original post in the description box, and I'm just going to pop up a picture now. I did mine a little differently, and I am going to do a tutorial on how I created mine. In the original, I think she did a die cut snowflake background, whereas I did an embossed snowflake background. I really liked the round piece that she had on the front. The sled that she has, I believe, is a die cut. I, of course, used the chipboard piece. And then I did a handmade poinsettia, a little floral or greenery cluster at the top, and these cute little ice skates. This Noel is a die from Scrap Diva. And then I just stamped the joyeux up here. Lots of fun. I did a border around mine where she did not. Let me see. This is actually a card set from Barely Art. They have a really cool A6 card set that I like to use. If you're not familiar with an A6 card, it's 4.5 by 6.25. And then the envelopes that they give you are 1/4 inch bigger on all sides. And then on the interior, I just kept it really simple. I just did a cute stamped image on some heavy-duty cardstock. But I really like how this card turned out, so stay tuned for the tutorial. Okay, for my basic card, I did, once again, it's an A6 card, so 4.5 by 6.25. You can either use a pre-made cardstock base like I did, or you can cut your own. You are going to want a sheet that is 9 by 6.25, and then of course fold it in half on the 9-inch side. I did double layer the interior and the exterior, so I used a bit of gold, and I cut it down 3/8 of an inch less than the card itself, so you have a nice thick border around there. And the card measurements for that will be 4 1/8 by 5 7/8. And then you will also need 2 white pieces of cardstock, and those are going to be 5 3/4 by 4. And once again, you'll need 2 and 2. And then I also die cut this round piece. This is going to measure, it's about 3 3/4 in diameter. So find a similar one. This is actually one of the basics dies from Scrap Diva. I like it because it has a decorative border on it, as well as the stitched piece. So let's put our card base together. Once again, you're going to cut your cardstock, fold it in half. I am just going to go ahead and glue on the interior portion. I'm going to grab some Barely Arts. It's a good glue for card making. Dries quick, but not so quick that you don't have time to kind of adjust when you need to. I've gotten out my stamp platform. I put the cardstock base in there, and then I'm just going to use this stamp for the interior. It's an older stamp. Don't ask me where it is, where it's from. It's just part of my stash. I'm going to go ahead and place it where I want to. I think I'm actually going to bring this up a little bit and bring this down. I'm going to use dye ink for this. Just want it nice and flat, fast drying. I did use a black. And then stamp my image. All right, I grabbed my cardstock base and adhered my sentiment to the interior of the card. Now I'm going to work on the outside of the card. You can go ahead and set this aside. You won't need your gold piece quite yet either. First thing that I'm going to do is emboss this. You could do it a lot of different ways. If you have a snowflake stamp set that you wanted to use, that would be really cool. You could do a heat embossing for the background. You could do just the die cut snowflakes like the original. Either way is going to be lots of fun. I am going to do a little dry embossing on this. I have this embossing folder. I believe it's a Sizzix. Yeah, it's a Sizzix one, maybe Tim Holtz, but it's one of the 3D ones. And if you haven't played with these, they're a lot of fun. They give a really cool look to your cards. The secret to using these die ones is to make sure that you wet your paper a little bit. Now, you don't want your paper soaking wet by any means, but I like to use these little mini misters to kind of wet my paper. For these dies, you don't need to use a base layer. You just use the top layer and then set this on top and then put this directly on your platform and run it through that way. If you try to use a base layer with one of these, you're just not going to get it to crank through and you'll break your machine. So I ran it through my embossing folder. Look at the texture and the detail on that. It's absolutely stunning. Now I am just going to glue this onto my gold base. So I went ahead and I adhered this embossed layer, and I'm going to grab my red card, pop that on top. I have everything glued to my cardstock base. I did glue it on directly. I did not use a pop-up dot here. I wanted to keep the card base as flat as possible to fit inside the envelope properly. Now, moving on, I am going to stamp this circular base here. Little fun tip, you don't have to keep your stamps together. The original stamp that I'm using looks something like that. I just cut it so that it would I only wanted the joyeux part of it. I didn't need the Noel. It would have been too small to use the Noel, and I wanted to use that Noel die cut. So all I'm using is this little portion of the stamp here, and it'll stamp properly. You just have to put it on your stamp platform or your acrylic block after you've cut it so that it stamps together. So once again, I'm just going to use a nice quick dry dye ink for this. Just kind of eyeing it up with my last one. I did say that if I was going to do this card again, I was going to bring that joyeux out a little. So I think this is going to be a good spot for it here. Okay, I have this stamped. I am going to set this aside. And now we're going to want to get out our mixed media. So let's get started on the sled portion of the card. This is a lot of fun to make. I love mixed media. I love getting out all of my little tools and my potions and all this crazy stuff and creating something that goes from this to this. Now, this is a chipboard piece from Scrapaholics Chipboard. I thought I had an extra one. I did not. So I cut this out with my Cricut. I wanted you to see the technique that I did. It is a little easier to do on this chipboard piece. The chipboard just absorbs the inks really well. I love doing it this way. And the way the chipboard designed, it was just easier to do the stamping portion and the coloring. But I did want you to see the technique because you could use this wood technique for a lot of different things. So if you look closely in the back of my design, you can see there is a metal portion of the sled, and I wanted to do that kind of a rusty color. And I'm going to show you how I did the rust. So I'm going to set aside these top pieces because that's going to be the wood portion of it. I'm going to focus solely on what is going to be the rusted portion. So when doing when doing a project like this, I prefer to use an embossing ink that's inside of a dauber versus an embossing pad. They're really easy to use. If you have not done this, you just rub it on like you would any other ink per se. And then this also kind of allows you to get the sides a little easier, I find. And I'm not going to go crazy on the interior because you're not going to see any of that. I'm just going to kind of go over the places that you're really going to see. So right in here. And I'm going to make sure that that's nice and wet with that embossing ink. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to use a gold embossing powder for this. The embossing powders that I use most, I dump out of those original bottles and I put it into these plastic containers. I like them because they're a little bigger and you can just grab a little spoon and sprinkle everything over, and I find it less messy. I don't do this with all of them, just it's a little easier to store the small bottles, let's face it, but it does make life a little easier when they are in containers like this. Now that I have all of my embossing powder on, I'm just gonna heat dry it. I will be right. I heat embossed the sled in the gold. And now to create the rust, I'm gonna go over it with, I like to use this Distress embossing powder. I've used tea dye, I've used vintage photo. I've used quite a few of the medium browns from the line to do this rust, the rust technique that I'm about to show you. Now, once again, you're going to take that embossing ink that you just used, and I'm just going to go over a few of these edges in here. I'm not going to go do the all over coat like what I did with the gold, but I am just going to kind of hit the places. And if your gold got a little spotty in some places, make sure you grab it this time around. And once again, you're not going to see all of it, but I'm going to go in there and I'm doing it pretty heavy as well. Now I'm going to take my Distress embossing powder. If you've ever used this stuff, give it a shake before you put it on there. So what makes the Distress embossing powder a little different than your typical embossing powder is it has crystals that are meant to release. They're not going to dry with the rest of the crystals that are in there that emboss the image. And you're actually able to kind of take your finger afterwards and rub it out in some spots. And it creates this really cool mottled look that looks remarkably like rust. So I find it better to use a spoon with embossing powder. It just gives me a bit more control than pouring it directly from the container. So I'm just going to go in there and tap it off. And as you can see, it's not catching in all the spots. It's not meant to. I only did a little bit of that embossing powder around the edges. I wanted the gold to peek through. Okay, so I have my embossing powder on there like it is. It's a little mottled. That's exactly how it should look. Now just go ahead and heat emboss. Once again, if you've never used this Distress embossing powder, I do feel like it takes a little longer to dry than your standard embossing powder. Not too much longer, but you'll see a slight variation in the color when it starts to dry. It's going to have a different look than regular embossing powder. Embossing powder turns super shiny. This does not. It's not meant to. My Distress ink is dry on there. I heat embossed it, and I'm just going to kind of go over with my thumb and pull up all of those crystals that have not melted. Super mottled, I know it doesn't look like much now, but when we put the wood on top of it, it's gonna look really, really cool. So now that I have everything heat embossed, I'm gonna work on the wood portion of this. So like I said, in the original sled, this whole front piece is one section. For this one, I am going to be adding these to the top, like so. And I'm just gonna kind of glue those down. We'll still be able to do a very similar technique to what I did on this card, and it's a lot of fun. I think you're gonna like this one. So I'm just gonna grab my glue and glue these base layers down. Okay, so I had a bit of a camera malfunction, so you didn't see me actually stamping this portion. But after I got all of my chipboard pieces on top, all I did was ink up my stamp with a little bit of pigment ink, lined it up on my grid here, stamped it down. Then I grabbed some clear embossing powder, embossed your stamp image to create a little bit of a raised layer to it. And look how that turned out. Lots of fun, right? But we're not done yet. So I'm gonna go in with a little bit of brown ink. For this one, I am using some Vintage Photo by Tim Holtz. And then I'm just gonna go in and catch that wood to kind of darken that chipboard down. And you can go ahead and let that ink hit your embossed portion as well. And that'll really kind of darken that rust down for you. If I really want to darken the edges, I will just apply the ink directly. There we go. Here's your sled. Isn't that really cool? We have our fun chipboard sled ready to go on our card. I am going to heat it up real quick and I will be right back. I'm back. Pro tip, when you're done with a project like this, wash your hands, clean your work surface. We're using a piece of white cardstock, and that's what makes this card so striking is the dark sled and the Noel on the white background. So save yourself some headache and make sure that everything is wiped down before you proceed. For a little contrast, I am going to pop up this white base. So I am using some Cubbies. It's the new release from Barely Art. Lots of fun. They come in 1/4 inch and 1/8 of an inch. I am using 1/8 of an inch. So I am going to use that grid once again and just kind of center everything. I'm coming maybe like 3/4 of an inch from the top and setting that down. Now we're going to take our sled and put it on right about here. Use a nice strong adhesive and pop that right on there. I kind of angled it out a little bit and let it go off the edge at the top and bottom as well. For the Noel, I used this die from Scrap Diva. I did cut it 3 times and glued it together just so that it was a lot heavier and it has a little more presence on there when it's thicker. Number 1 tip for this, make sure that you're using a really fine tip for this. When the glue starts to go all over the place, it's not that great of a look. So it can get a little splotchy. So go ahead and make sure that you're doing a really fine tip for that adhesive when you're layering super thin pieces like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and lay this Noel part down. And I'm just gonna kind of see how it looks here. Yeah, I like that. Okay. So I'm gonna go in with a really fine tip. I did pop up the N for the Noel just so that it kind of matched the OEL that's on the sled. So I took one of these foam dots, cut it in half, and I just put it on this thicker part of the N so that I could cover it up. Just pop that on. I am going to go in with a little bit of adhesive right on this bottom portion of the N. Okay, now that I have my sentiment on there, I'm gonna start on my floral cluster and then just add a little snow. We're almost done. So for the ice skates, I used these foam stickers. I think they're from Hobby Lobby. They're from a while back, but I thought these were really cute. And for the first ice skate, I am going to put that on with an 1/8 of an inch pop-up dot. And I'm probably just gonna put it, well, I think I'm gonna put it right here. And then for the second one, I'm layering it with a 1/4 of an inch pop-up dot. And I'll put that one right there. Now it's just a matter of adding my floral cluster. And for my greenery, you could use dyes. I like to use the faux greenery from like Joann's, Michael's. They have it really cheap. You can cut it to whatever length you want. But I love how that looks, and it's easy. I'm gonna go in there with a little bit of hot glue. Just lay this down, a little bit of hot glue. And if you want it to just lie in one spot, just add a little more glue. I want that to come down a little. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing for the other side. All right, now that I have my florals attached, I just topped it off with some of these red bead picks. All I did was fold it in half. I'm gonna pinch the ends with my tweezers and then separate it a little and tuck it in with some hot glue. Okay, so we have our floral cluster completed. I am just gonna go in with a little bit of faux snow to add a little visual interest. So for my snow, I use this glitter snow from Alina, something like that. I've used a lot of stuff in the past. I've used modeling paste before, anything that's going to give it kind of an opaque look to it. But I just go in with a paintbrush, and this has a very mousse-like texture. It's really, really light. And then I just go in and catch the edges. And if it gets a little chunky in places, don't worry, snow does not fall perfectly. It'll just kind of add to your image. I really went in onto the flower because I wanted to lighten this whole area up a little bit. So I'm really going to kind of get in there. I'm going to catch a little bit of this ice skate as well. I'm going to come down here and catch the edge of my sled. So we're all set with our card. Lots of fun. Got a stamped image inside. Great mixed media. Lots of fun to create. So thank you for watching. I hope you've been liking this holiday card series that I've been doing. Like I said in my first video, I'm aiming for 2 videos per week. I don't have a set list of what I'd like to make. It's really just going to be how I feel like creating that day. But this is cute. I want to do a lot more of the mixed media cards. This is a lot of fun for me. And I hope you enjoy it too. I hope you learn some new tips and techniques. And don't forget to head on over to Scrapaholics Chipboard. Tracy has an amazing shop. I am sure you're going to find some great stuff in there. If you like this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more crafty content. I will see you in the next crafty video. Bye!